At 38 years old, Darius Miller understood the intricate language of electricity. He knew that a 20-amp circuit breaker would trip under a 22-amp load, that the resistance of a copper wire changed with temperature, and that a poorly grounded system was a disaster waiting to happen. He made a steady $69,000 a year navigating these immutable laws of physics for a commercial contracting firm in Nashville, a job that was honest, demanding, and utterly invisible to most people. Tonight, however, he was learning a different kind of wiring diagram, the complex, treacherous circuits of high society. The rented tuxedo, a standard black-on-black package from a strip mall formal wear shop, had cost him $450 for a single night's use. It felt stiff and foreign against his skin, a costume for a play he hadn't auditioned for. He stood awkwardly at the entrance to the newly restored ballroom of the Belmead Grand, a cavernous space dripping with crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than his 2018 Ford F-150 truck. The air smelled of money, a cloying mix of expensive perfume, hothouse flowers, and whatever impossibly priced catering was being warmed in the back. His wife, Vanessa, was a vision of effortless belonging. Her gown, a shimmering midnight blue creation by Badgley Mishka, had set them back $6,000, a figure she justified as an essential investment in the family's image. Her deep brown skin was luminous under the carefully engineered lighting, and a pair of simple diamond earrings, a $1,200 anniversary gift from him last year, sparkled at her ears. She took his hand, her touch light and fleeting, and smiled a brilliant, public-facing smile. "There you are, darling," she said, her voice a polished murmur. "Mother is waiting." Pamela Monroe, his mother-in-law, stood nearby, a formidable figure in an emerald green gown that screamed old money. She was the matriarch of the Monroe family, a name that carried weight in these Belmead circles, though the actual fortune had dwindled to little more than the name itself. Pamela surveyed Darius from head to toe, her gaze lingering for a half-second too long on the slightly too wide shoulders of his rented jacket. It was a look he knew well, a silent appraisal that always found him wanting. "Darius," she said, the single word a complete and damning sentence. "Come along, we need to get you settled." He had expected to be led to table 3, a prime spot near the stage, where a crisp place card was supposed to read Mr. and Mrs. Darius Miller. He'd seen the seating chart himself on the ornate easel in the lobby, but Vanessa and Pamela weren't walking toward the center of the room. They were guiding him along the periphery, past the smiling, nodding guests, their path tracing the far wall of the ballroom. His stomach tightened. They stopped in a dimly lit alcove almost completely concealed by a large, 6-panel decorative screen painted with a pastoral scene. Tucked behind it was a small, unadorned round table, barely large enough for a dinner plate and a water glass. It was set for one. The rhythmic, percussive clatter of dishes and the hurried shouts of kitchen staff were clearly audible from behind a set of swinging doors just a few feet away. Darius stopped, his confusion turning to a cold, sinking dread. "What's this?" Vanessa wouldn't meet his eyes. She fussed with the sleeve of her gown. It's a very complicated night, darling." The seating was a nightmare. A few last-minute benefactors arrived, and Mother had to perform a miracle. Pamela, however, felt no need for such delicate lies. She looked directly at him, her expression one of mild irritation, as if he were a piece of furniture that had been delivered to the wrong address. "We just thought you'd be more comfortable over here," she said, her voice laced with a condescending sweetness. "Out of the fray. You've never been one for crowds." She then turned to Vanessa, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was perfectly, intentionally audible. "Besides, the catering corner suits him better tonight. He can keep an eye on the service." The words landed like stones. Catering corner. He wasn't a guest. He was being classified with the staff, He looked at his wife, searching for some sign of protest, some spark of loyalty. He found none. Vanessa simply gave a tight, apologetic little shrug, as if to say, "What can you do?" He was a black man who worked with his hands, a man who earned an honest, if unremarkable, living. He had known from the day he'd married into the Monroe family that he was an anomaly in their world of inherited prestige and carefully curated appearances. But he had never imagined they would make their disdain so nakedly, so publicly clear. He was not family. He was a prop. And tonight he was a prop they preferred to store out of sight. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that spread up his neck, a leaden weight settling deep in his gut. He had no idea how wrong he was about the true depth of their betrayal. What he was feeling now was only the beginning. Do you know that feeling? The one where the people who are supposed to love you the most make you feel like a stranger? Let us know your story in the comments below, because you are not alone. Sharing our truth is the first step toward reclaiming our power. As he sank into the solitary chair, the fine wool of his $450 tuxedo felt like sandpaper. The sounds of the gala, the polite laughter, the clinking of champagne flutes, the soft swell of a string quartet playing something Vivaldi-esque felt a million miles away. Here, in his designated corner, the dominant sounds were the frantic, swinging rhythm of the kitchen doors and the clatter of bus tubs. He was an island of social exile in a sea of celebration. His mind drifted back, away from the Belmead Ballroom, to the place where all of this began, their modest $450,000 bungalow in East Nashville. It was a world away from this opulence. He thought of the Saturday mornings spent in the small backyard, his hands covered in dirt from the garden beds he'd built, while Vanessa read a novel on the porch swing he'd installed. He remembered the smell of the jambalaya he liked to cook on Sunday evenings, the whole house filling with the scent of sausage and spice, a recipe passed down from his own mother. In those moments, their life had felt real, grounded, a partnership built on small, shared joys. He'd bought the house with his own savings before they were married, a 1,400 square foot home with good bones and a wiring system from the 1970s that he'd meticulously updated himself, spending weekends pulling new Romex through the walls. Vanessa, with her art history degree and her part-time job at a boutique gallery, had filled it with things that looked beautiful but were often impractical. A $1,500 white linen sofa he was terrified to sit on after work. A fragile, antique vase that cost $800 and held nothing but decorative twigs. He didn't mind. He loved her, and he loved the life they were supposedly building. The conversation that changed everything had happened on one of those quiet Sunday evenings about a year ago. His father, a master plumber who had run his own small business for 40 years, had passed away, leaving Darius a surprisingly robust portfolio of stocks and bonds. After all the taxes and fees, it amounted to just over $250,000. For Darius, a man who lived by the hour and the project bid, it was a life-altering sum. His dream was simple: to start his own electrical contracting firm, Miller Electric. He'd already priced out a used bucket truck, a 2015 model, for about $55,000, and drafted a business plan. He'd laid it all out for Vanessa over a plate of his jambalaya. Her reaction was not what he expected. She'd listened patiently, a thoughtful frown on her face. Then she had taken his hand. "Darius, that's a wonderful dream," she'd said, her voice soft and persuasive. "But starting a business is so risky. All that overhead, the insurance. So many new businesses fail." Later that week, Pamela had joined them for dinner. The topic came up again. Pamela had seized on it with the intensity of a hawk spotting its prey. "A contracting business?" she'd said, dabbing her lips with a napkin. "Darius, that's admirable. But it's not a legacy. It's a trade. Your father's gift is an opportunity to do something truly significant, something permanent." That was when they had presented their alternative. The Belmead Foundation, Pamela's lifelong project, was trying to raise funds to restore the Grand Ballroom, a historic landmark that had fallen into disrepair. A major donation, they explained, would not just save the ballroom, it would elevate the Monroe family name, securing their social standing for a generation. "Imagine it, darling," Vanessa had said, her eyes shining with an ambition he'd mistaken for shared excitement. "The Monroe name, forever associated with this incredible act of civic generosity. It's an investment in our future. It opens doors for us, for our children. We'll be the toast of Nashville," Pamela had added, her hand resting on his arm, a rare gesture of affection that felt, in retrospect, entirely calculated. Your contribution, under the family's banner, would be the cornerstone of it all. He had been hesitant. The money was his last tangible connection to his father, a man who believed in the value of a hard day's work and a paid-off mortgage. But he loved Vanessa. He wanted her to be proud of him. He wanted to belong to her family, to bridge the gap between his world of work boots and tool belts and her world of gallery openings and society pages. So he had agreed. He'd met with his lawyer, a precaution his own practical father would have insisted upon, and then with the foundation's finance committee. He remembered the day he authorized the wire transfer, $230,000. The number had seemed impossibly large on the bank's confirmation screen. He'd felt a pang of loss, the dream of Miller Electric dissolving before his eyes, but he'd pushed it down, telling himself he was doing the right thing for his new family. He was building a legacy, just a different kind than he had planned. He had signed the donation agreement, a thick stack of papers filled with legal jargon. Vanessa had breezed over the details, calling the bylaws section boring fine print. He had trusted her. He had believed they were in it together. A sharp clatter from the kitchen jolted him back to the present. A waiter, a young man with slicked back hair and a harried expression, rushed past his table, nearly tripping. A few guests at a nearby table glanced over, their expressions a mixture of pity and curiosity. Who was this man, sitting alone by the service entrance? Darius could read the question in their eyes. He felt a fresh wave of shame. He wasn't just invisible. He was a curiosity, a social miscalculation someone had made. At 7:15 p.m., Vanessa appeared at his side. She didn't sit. She stood, her posture radiating impatience, her eyes scanning the crowd as if looking for someone more important. "Are you all right over here?" she asked, the question a hollow formality. "I'm fine," he lied, his voice flat. "Good. Look, Darius, try to look busy, or at least inconspicuous. Mingle with the staff if you have to. People are starting to ask who you are." She adjusted her $1,200 earring, her focus on her own reflection in the polished silver of a nearby champagne bucket. "It's just for a few more hours. We can talk about it later." She was gone before he could respond, gliding back toward the warmth and light of Table 3, leaving him in the cold shadow of the decorative screen. Mingle with the staff. The suggestion wasn't an insult, it was a classification. In her eyes, that's where he belonged. The jambalaya, the garden, the porch swing, it all felt like a lie, a carefully constructed facade to get what she and her mother had wanted all along: his money, his father's legacy. He had been a means to an end, and now that the end was achieved, he was being discarded in the most humiliating way possible. The outrage began to smolder, a low, steady burn deep within him. The evening wore on, each minute a small, distinct humiliation. At 7:25 p.m., a woman in a sequined dress, her face flushed with champagne, stumbled near his corner. A full glass of red wine slipped from her fingers, shattering on the polished marble floor. A waiter was there in a flash, but not before the woman looked at Darius, who had instinctively half risen from his chair. "Oh, you," she called out, waving a dismissive hand. "Get this, quickly." She thought he was a busboy. Before Darius could even process the indignity, the actual waiter was kneeling with a cloth and dustpan. Darius simply sank back into his chair, his face burning. He didn't say a word. To protest would be to draw more attention to his strange, solitary confinement. He was trapped. 10 minutes later, he overheard a conversation that stripped away the last vestiges of his denial. A portly man with a booming voice, whom he recognized from the Foundation's website as a board member named Charles Worthington, was standing near the screen, speaking with another couple. He gestured expansively at the room. "It's just breathtaking what Pamela has accomplished," Charles boomed, loud enough for half the room to hear. "Simply breathtaking. To think, the Monroe family, in their time of need, scraped together everything they had for this, for the city." Pamela, who had drifted over to join the group, placed a delicate hand on Charles's arm. "Oh, Charles, you're too kind," she demurred, though her face was alight with triumph. "It was our honor. It took every last penny, of course. But preserving this history, well, that's what the Monroe Foundation is all about. It's the legacy we wish to leave. Every last penny." The lie was so audacious, so complete, that it almost took his breath away. It wasn't just an omission, it was a total fabrication. They hadn't just hidden his contribution, they had stolen the very narrative of it, recasting his father's life savings as their own noble sacrifice. He felt a cold, sharp anger cutting through the fog of his humiliation. He had been a fool, a willing, trusting fool. He watched his wife, Vanessa, across the room. She was laughing, her head tilted back, a picture of grace and charm. She was accepting congratulations on his behalf, on his father's behalf, and she was doing it without a flicker of shame. She caught his eye for a brief moment. She gave him a small, tight smile, a smile that said, "Play along. Don't ruin this for me." He had to get some air. He stood up and walked toward the swinging doors of the kitchen, needing a moment away from the suffocating hypocrisy of the ballroom. Pushing through, he found himself in a different world. It was a chaotic ballet of stainless steel, white tile, and steam. The air was thick with the smell of seared scallops and garlic, a stark contrast to the delicate floral scents of the gala. Chefs in white coats shouted orders. Waitstaff rushed in and out, their faces slick with sweat. It was loud, hot, and brutally efficient. It was a world of work, a world he understood far better than the one he'd just left. He leaned against a cool patch of tile, closing his eyes, just breathing. This was a place where value was clear. You did your job, you did it well, and you kept the system running. There were no illusions here, no false legacies. "Hey, watch your back," a voice called out. Darius opened his eyes and stepped aside just as a young man, no older than 19, tried to maneuver a large, precarious stack of dirty dinner plates through the narrow passage. The kid was moving too fast, his movements jerky with nervous energy. As he turned, his elbow bumped the stack, and the top 3 plates began to slide. Darius's reaction was instant. He shot out a hand, his calloused electrician's fingers steadying the stack just before it could crash to the floor. "Whoa there, got it." The busboy let out a huge sigh of relief, his shoulders slumping. "Oh man, thank you. Chef would have had my hide." He looked at Darius, taking in the rented tuxedo, a look of confusion on his face. "Thanks, really? You're not one of the regular staff, are you? Haven't seen you before?" Darius managed a small, wry smile. "Something like that. Just trying to stay out of the way." "Tell me about it," the kid muttered, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead with the back of his wrist. "It's a zoo tonight." He paused, his brow furrowing as a thought occurred to him. He started fumbling in the pocket of his black apron. "Oh, hey, this is weird. Maybe you can help." He pulled out a small, elegant piece of cardstock, slightly bent at one corner. It was a place card, cream-colored with beautiful, embossed gold lettering, identical to the ones on the VIP tables. "We found this when we were setting up this afternoon," the busboy explained, holding it out. "It had gotten kicked under the baseboard behind that big wooden screen out there. We figured it fell off one of the main tables, but the name's not on the master seating chart. The manager told me to just toss it, but I forgot." Darius took the card. The thick paper felt heavy in his hand, a tangible piece of the world he was supposed to inhabit tonight. He looked down at the name inscribed in shimmering gold calligraphy, Darius Miller, and beneath his name, 2 other words, Principal Underwriter. The kitchen noise, the shouting, the clatter of plates, it all faded into a dull, distant roar. The only sound was the frantic drumming of his own heart. Principal Underwriter. The term was formal, legalistic. It wasn't benefactor or donor. It was specific. It was contractual. He turned the card over in his fingers. They had known. They must have known this card existed. They hadn't just sat him in the corner. They had actively hidden his identity. They had taken his card, his title, and thrown it away, leaving it to be kicked into the dirt and grime behind a decorative screen. The busboy was looking at him, waiting. "You know who that is?" Darius looked up, his eyes clear and focused. The humiliation was gone, burned away by the cold, clean flame of understanding. It was replaced by something else, something hard and sharp and precise, a plan. "Yeah," Darius said, his voice quiet but firm. "I do. Thank you. You have no idea how much you just helped me." He slipped the card into the inside pocket of his jacket. It felt less like a piece of paper and more like a key to the bylaws Vanessa had called boring fine print, a key to the contract he had signed. They had made a critical mistake. They had underestimated him. They had assumed the man who worked with his hands didn't read the paperwork. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. Have you ever discovered a betrayal that was worse than you could have possibly imagined? The moment where everything clicks into place can be devastating, but it can also be the source of incredible strength. Tell us about your moment of clarity in the comments. Your story could be the light someone else needs to see their own way forward. At 7:47 p.m., Darius returned to his solitary table behind the screen. He sat down, but he was no longer the same man who had been sent here an hour ago. The shame had been replaced by a chilling, methodical calm. He was an electrician again, but this time the faulty circuit was his own life, and he was about to rewire it. He placed his hands on the table, forcing them to be still, and began to assemble the pieces in his mind. Principal Underwriter. The term echoed in his head. He thought back to the day he signed the donation agreement. His lawyer, a sharp, older woman named Carol, had insisted on a few key clauses. Carol had been his first wife's divorce lawyer, a tough but fair woman who had developed a soft spot for Darius. When his father died, he'd called her for advice on the estate, and she had guided him through the probate process for a fraction of her usual $800 per hour fee. When he told her about his plan to donate the inheritance, she had been skeptical. "Darius, are you sure about this? This is your future, your father's work." "It's for my family, Carol," he had argued. "For Vanessa." Carol had sighed, knowing she couldn't change his mind. All right. But if you're going to give away $250,000, we are going to do it right. We're not just writing a check. We're making a formal underwriting agreement. She had been the one to draft the language. He remembered her pointing to a specific paragraph. "This is important, Darius," she had said, her finger tapping the page. "You are not a donor. You are the principal underwriter. It's a legal distinction. It means your contribution is the foundational one that makes the entire project possible. As such, you are entitled to all rights and privileges afforded to that position as defined by the Bell Mead Foundation's own bylaws." He had nodded, not fully grasping the significance. Vanessa had been there, tapping her foot impatiently. "It's all just boring legal stuff, darling," she'd said, trying to rush him. "Can we just sign it?" But he had read the clause, and he had specifically remembered Carol making him look up Article 4, Section 2 of the bylaws on her office computer. It was a dry, dense document, but the words were coming back to him now, sharp and clear. "The principal underwriter of any capital restoration project exceeding $100,000 shall be granted the honor of delivering the keynote address at the project's inaugural gala." His breath caught. A keynote address. They had planned a whole program with Pamela set to give the main speech, and they had tried to erase the man who legally held that right. And there was more. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to visualize the page. There was a second part to the clause. "Furthermore, the principal underwriter shall hold the sole authority to approve, by public assent, the final proposed board slate for the subsequent fiscal year, ensuring the Foundation's governance remains aligned with the spirit of its most significant benefactors." His eyes snapped open. Sole authority to approve the board slate. He remembered seeing the proposed slate in the glossy program that had been left on his lonely table. He picked it up now, his hands no longer trembling. He flipped through the pages, past the glowing profiles of the Monroe family and the history of the ballroom. And there it was. Proposed 2023 board slate. Charles Worthington, Eleanor Vance, Richard Petrov, Pamela Monroe, chair. They hadn't just tried to humiliate him, they had used his money to secure Pamela's position of ultimate power within the foundation. They had leveraged his father's life savings to solidify their own dynasty, all while literally hiding him behind a screen. The sheer, calculated audacity of it was staggering. This wasn't a social slight, it was a conspiracy. It was fraud. He had everything he needed. The place card in his pocket was the physical proof of their intent to erase him. The memory of the contract and the bylaws was his weapon. Now came the hardest part, waiting. He had to sit here, in his corner, and act the part of the chastened, compliant husband. He had to let them believe their plan was working perfectly. He folded the program and set it down, composing his face into a mask of weary resignation. At 8:15 p.m., Pamela swept by his table on her way to the powder room, a queen surveying her domain. She paused, looking down at him with an expression of faint disgust. "Still here?" "Good," she said, her tone the one a person might use with a dog that had been told to stay. "The main program is starting in about half an hour. It would be terribly awkward if you were wandering about when the speeches begin. Just stay put." He looked up at her, his expression carefully blank. "Yes, Pamela, I wouldn't want to cause a scene." She gave a satisfied little nod and swept away oblivious. The dramatic irony was so thick he could taste it. She was worried about him causing a small scene, having no idea he was about to dismantle her entire world. A few minutes later, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Vanessa, sent from 30 feet away. "Are you okay? Sorry about this. It's just complicated. Mom's idea. She can be so forceful." He could see her at table 3, surrounded by laughing, admiring faces. She was looking down at her phone, a mask of feigned concern on her face, likely for the benefit of the woman sitting next to her. She was playing her part too, the loving, if conflicted wife. The message was a masterclass in manipulation, shifting blame, feigning sympathy, and demanding his complicity all at once. For a moment, a wave of profound sadness washed over him. This was his wife, the woman he had promised to love and cherish, the woman he had cooked for, built a home with, and entrusted with his father's memory. And it was all a lie. The love, the partnership, the shared future. It was a facade she had maintained just long enough to get what she wanted. He took a deep breath, pushing the sorrow down. There would be time for grief later. Now was the time for clarity. He typed a reply, his fingers moving with deliberate precision. "I'm fine. Don't worry about me. Enjoy the evening." He hit send. Across the room he saw her read the message, a visible flicker of relief crossing her features. She looked up, met his gaze, and gave him another one of those small, tight, conspiratorial smiles. She thought he had folded. She thought he had accepted his place in the dark. He leaned back in his chair, a silent observer. He watched them bask in the glory of his gift. He watched them accept praise for a sacrifice they never made. Each compliment they accepted, each congratulatory handshake, was another piece of evidence. He wasn't just gathering facts. He was accumulating outrage, and he was storing it, channeling it, not into heat, but into a cold, focused energy. The main program was starting soon, and he would be ready. At 9:15 p.m., the lights in the grand ballroom dimmed. A single, brilliant spotlight found a man standing at the podium on the stage. He was Marcus Thorne, the charismatic executive director of the Bell Mead Foundation, a man whose career depended on keeping benefactors happy. "Good evening, everyone," Marcus began, his voice smooth and resonant, amplified by a state-of-the-art sound system that Darius knew had cost at least $40,000 to install. "Welcome. On behalf of the entire foundation, thank you for being here tonight to celebrate a true Nashville miracle." He gestured around the room. Just 1 year ago, this magnificent ballroom, a jewel of our city's history, was a shadow of its former self. Plaster was crumbling, the floors were warped, and the wiring, well, the fire marshal told us it was a certifiable death trap. A ripple of polite laughter went through the crowd. Darius remained still in his corner, his heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. "Tonight," Marcus continued, his voice swelling with practiced emotion, "we are gathered in this reborn space, a testament to what is possible when history is cherished and generosity knows no bounds." This restoration was not a simple task. It was a complete, top-to-bottom overhaul, costing hundreds of thousands of dollars. He paused for dramatic effect, his gaze sweeping over the front tables. And it was made possible by the vision, the dedication, and the singular, breathtaking generosity of one family. A family that has been a pillar of this community for generations. A family that, when called upon, dug deep to ensure this legacy would not be lost. He raised his champagne flute. "And now, a toast. Please stand with me. To the family who made this night and the future of this institution possible. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the Monroe family." A wave of applause erupted through the ballroom. At table 3, Pamela and Vanessa rose gracefully to their feet. Pamela, her face a perfect mask of humble pride, gave a regal nod to the crowd. Vanessa beamed, her eyes shining, as she squeezed her mother's hand. They were the heroines of the hour, the saviors of Belle Meade's history. They soaked in the adoration, turning to acknowledge the applause from every corner of the room, except, of course, for the dark corner by the kitchen. Darius watched them. He felt nothing. The anger, the humiliation, it had all burned down to a single, cold point of purpose. Marcus Thorne let the applause begin to fade. He cleared his throat, looking down at the index card in his hand. A slight, almost imperceptible frown touched his lips. He was an experienced host, and he knew a deviation from the script when he saw one. He had clearly been given new information. "Thank you," he said, his voice now more measured, less effusive. "Please, be seated." There was a rustle as the guests sat back down. Pamela and Vanessa remained standing for a moment, reluctant to let their moment end. The Monroe family were indeed the public face of this incredible campaign, and we thank them for their tireless efforts in championing this cause, Marcus said carefully. But the bylaws of the Bell Mead Foundation are very specific. They are an old document written with a deep respect for precision and truth, and they are designed to honor true patronage above all else. A confused murmur rippled through the room. At table 3, Pamela's smile tightened. Vanessa's brow furrowed in confusion. They exchanged a quick, nervous glance. This was not part of the plan. "The bylaws state," Marcus continued, reading directly from his card now, "that the principal underwriter of a capital project must be given the final word of the evening. They also state that this individual must personally and publicly approve the new board slate for the coming year." He looked up, letting the weight of his words sink in. The room had gone completely silent. The paperwork, the official, legally binding donation agreement, and the actual wire transfer for the full restoration cost of $230,000. That came from one person. Panic flashed in Pamela's eyes. Pure, unadulterated panic. She looked wildly around the room, as if searching for the source of this disaster. Vanessa's face had gone chalk white, her carefully applied makeup suddenly looking like a brittle mask. Her eyes darted around, finally landing on the dark alcove where Darius sat. And in that moment, she knew. "It is therefore my great honor and my contractual obligation," Marcus announced, his voice ringing with authority, "to ask him to come to the stage now. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the principal underwriter of the Monroe Ballroom Restoration Project, Mr. Darius Miller." Silence, a deep, profound, and absolute silence. You could have heard a pin drop on the $150,000 hand-scraped maple flooring. Every head in the room turned, scanning the VIP tables, looking for this mystery man. Who was Darius Miller? And then, from the shadows by the kitchen, a figure rose. Darius stepped out from behind the decorative screen. He straightened the jacket of his $450 rented tuxedo. It no longer felt like a costume. It felt like armor. He began to walk. His path took him directly past table 3. He walked with a steady, unhurried gait, his shoulders back, his head held high. He could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on him, a current of shock and confusion flowing through the room. The whispers started spreading like wildfire. "Who is that? Is that her husband? What's going on?" He didn't look at the other guests. He looked only at the stage. But out of the corner of his eye, he saw them. He saw Pamela, her mouth slightly agape, her face a grotesque mixture of fury and disbelief. He saw Vanessa. She looked like she had been struck. Her eyes were wide with horror, pleading with him. "Don't do this," her expression begged. "Please don't do this." He kept walking. He reached the low stairs to the stage, ascended them, and walked to the podium. He shook Marcus Thorne's outstretched hand. Marcus gave his hand a firm, respectful squeeze and stepped back. Darius looked out at the sea of stunned faces. He adjusted the microphone, the metal cool and solid beneath his fingers. He gripped the sides of the lectern, the same way his father used to grip a pipe wrench, with confidence and control. The spotlight was warm on his face. He was no longer in the shadows. He took a breath and began to speak. "Good evening," Darius said. His voice, calm and steady, filled the silent ballroom. It was the voice of a man who knew his own mind, a voice without a trace of anger or vindictiveness. It was simply the voice of truth. "My name is Darius Miller. I'm a commercial electrician." He let the statement hang in the air for a moment. He could feel the confusion in the room, the cognitive dissonance of the crowd trying to reconcile the man in the tuxedo, on the stage with the blue-collar job he had just named. "My late father," he continued, his gaze sweeping across the room but not yet landing on his wife or mother-in-law, was a plumber. He ran his own business for 40 years, and he taught me that the most important work is often the work you can't see. It's the pipes behind the drywall, the foundation under the floor, the wires behind the plaster that safely carry the current and make the lights turn on. He taught me that a person's name isn't what they put on a plaque. It's what they build and who they build it for. He paused, letting the simple philosophy settle over the audience of people who lived and died by the names on plaques. "There seems to have been some confusion tonight about generosity. I've learned that generosity isn't about sitting at the head table or having your name in a program. It isn't about a $6,000 dress or a photo in the society pages. It's about ensuring the lights stay on for everyone, even when no one knows you're the one who flipped the switch." Now, he allowed his eyes to find table 3. Vanessa was staring at him, tears beginning to stream down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. Pamela was rigid, her face pale, her hands clenched into fists on the white linen tablecloth. "My father left me his life savings. It was just over $250,000. I chose to donate $230,000 of that inheritance to this foundation. I did it because I was told it was an investment in my family's future and in this community's shared history." He held up the place card, the gold lettering catching the spotlight. "I was designated the principal underwriter. This title, according to the foundation's own rules, comes with certain responsibilities." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a single sheet of paper, a page he had torn from the gala program. He had crossed out one name and written in another with a pen borrowed from a waiter. "The bylaws give me the privilege of approving the new board slate for the coming year," he said, his voice remaining perfectly even. "I have here the proposed slate, which I'm sure you've all seen in your programs. It lists Pamela Monroe as the incoming chair." A collective gasp went through the room. This was no longer just a correction of the record. This was a public execution. "I cannot in good conscience," Darius said, his words precise and devastating, "approve a board led by someone who would knowingly and deliberately obscure the source of the very gift this gala is meant to celebrate. To do so would be a disservice to my father's memory and to the true meaning of charity. Therefore, I formally reject the proposed slate." Pamela Monroe made a small, strangled sound. She swayed on her feet, and Charles Worthington, sitting beside her, put a hand on her arm to steady her. Her public life, her entire identity as a philanthropic gatekeeper, was evaporating under the glare of a single spotlight. "However," Darius continued, not missing a beat, "the bylaws require a board. So, I have taken the liberty of preparing a revised slate." He looked down at the paper. "I approve the appointments of Charles Worthington, Eleanor Vance, and Richard Petrov." He looked up again. "That leaves one vacant seat, the one designated for the chair. For that position, I nominate someone who truly understands what it means to build something for the community with limited resources. I nominate Alana Jenkins, the executive director of the East Nashville Youth Center." A new wave of whispers erupted. Alana Jenkins was a well-respected but low-profile figure, known for her tireless work with at-risk kids in a part of town most people in this ballroom only drove through. Nominating her wasn't just a rejection of Pamela. It was a complete reorientation of the foundation's values. "That is the board I approve," Darius stated simply. "Thank you for your time. Please enjoy the rest of your evening." He placed the paper with his handwritten nomination on the podium. He gave a slight nod to the stunned audience and then turned and walked calmly off the stage, not looking back. The consequences were immediate and catastrophic. The moment Darius stepped off the stage, the ballroom erupted not into applause, but into a cacophony of hushed, frantic conversations. The spell was broken. The carefully constructed illusion of the evening had been shattered. Pamela Monroe was the first to break. Her face, a mask of pure, unadulterated fury, she pushed back her chair so violently it nearly toppled over. She muttered something to Vanessa, her words sharp and venomous, before turning and practically fleeing the ballroom. She didn't walk. She stormed, her head down, as 100 pairs of eyes followed her, whispering. Her reign as a queen of Nashville society was over, ended in less than 5 minutes by the quiet, working-class man she had tried to hide in a corner. Her social currency, built over a lifetime, was now worthless. Vanessa was frozen in place, a statue of ruin at the center of the room's attention. The friends and admirers who had surrounded her just minutes before were now keeping a careful distance, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid fascination. She looked lost, exposed, stripped of the borrowed glory she had worn so comfortably. She finally stumbled to her feet and tried to intercept Darius as he headed for the main exit. "Darius, wait!" she cried, her voice cracking. She grabbed his arm. "Darius, please, we can fix this. Listen to me. It was my mother's idea, I swear. She pushed me into it." Darius stopped and looked at her. He looked at her tear-streaked face, her desperate eyes, and he felt nothing. The love he had once felt was gone, replaced by a vast, empty space. "There's nothing to fix, Vanessa," he said, his voice quiet but final. He gently removed her hand from his arm. "You didn't just go along with your mother's idea. You made a choice. You showed me exactly where I stand. You showed me my value in your world." He turned and continued walking toward the massive oak doors of the ballroom. He didn't run. He didn't rush. He simply left. Behind him, Marcus Thorne, ever the professional, had already recovered and retaken the stage. "Well," he said into the microphone, his voice tight, "as per the bylaws, the approved board slate stands. Let's have a round of applause for our new board members and our new chair, Alana Jenkins." A scattered, uncertain applause followed. The party was over. Darius pushed open the doors and stepped out into the cool, clean night air of Belle Mead. He took a deep breath. It felt like the first real breath he had taken all night. The weight of the tuxedo, of their expectations, of their casual cruelty, was gone. He walked past the valets and the line of gleaming luxury cars, the $150,000 Porsches and $200,000 Bentleys, and didn't feel a single pang of envy. He reached his own vehicle, a 2018 Ford F-150 with 80,000 miles on it, a practical machine worth about $28,000. He climbed in, the familiar scent of the cab a comfort. He had about $20,000 left of his father's inheritance, plus his steady salary. He had his skills. He had his integrity. He had himself. It was more than enough. He started the engine, the rumble of the V8 a reassuring sound. He pulled out of the grand circular driveway of the Belle Mead Grand, leaving the world of glass towers and broken promises behind in his rearview mirror. He was driving back toward East Nashville, back toward his real life. He was free. 6 months passed. The Nashville Society pages had feasted on the story of the Gala coup for weeks, painting Darius as a folk hero and the Monroes as disgraced social climbers. The divorce had been quiet and swift. Vanessa had tried, through her lawyers, to lay claim to half of his remaining assets, but the prenuptial agreement he'd signed, another of Carol's wise insistences, had protected him. He'd sold the bungalow in East Nashville, splitting the equity with her as required by law, and moved into a simple, 2-bedroom rented apartment. He was starting over. On a bright Saturday morning in May, Darius wasn't in a ballroom. He was in the cavernous, half-finished main hall of the East Nashville Youth Center. The large, multi-purpose room smelled of fresh paint, sawdust, and the faint, lingering scent of industrial-strength floor cleaner. Sunlight streamed through the large, newly installed windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The space was alive with the sounds of renewal, the buzz of a power saw, the rhythmic tapping of a hammer, the cheerful chatter of volunteers. Darius was on a 12-foot aluminum ladder, his face close to the ceiling. He wore his usual work clothes, worn jeans, steel-toed boots, and a simple gray t-shirt. His tool belt, a well-worn leather piece worth about $150, was cinched around his hips. He was meticulously connecting wires in a junction box, his movements practiced and efficient. He was donating his time and expertise to completely rewire the entire 5,000-square-foot building, a pro bono job that would have cost the center upwards of $50,000. "I still can't believe you're doing all this for free," a voice said from the bottom of the ladder. He looked down. It was Alana Jenkins, the center's director and, thanks to him, the new chair of the Belle Meade Foundation. She was a warm, energetic black woman in her 50s, her natural hair pulled back in a simple twist. She was holding 2 steaming styrofoam cups of coffee. "The grant you helped us get from the foundation would have more than covered your professional rates, you know," she added, a grateful smile on her face. Darius smiled back, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. "I know, Alana. But this is different. This is for me." He finished tightening the last connection, his hands sure and steady. He carefully tucked the wires back into the box and secured the metal cover plate. The job was almost done. He climbed down the ladder, his boots thudding softly on the concrete floor. Alana handed him a coffee. "Well, the kids are going to love it. Having reliable lights for the computer lab, outlets that don't spark when you plug something in. It's a bigger deal than you can imagine." "It's the stuff you don't see that matters most," Darius said, the words echoing his speech from that night. This time they felt less like a statement and more like a simple, lived-in truth. He walked over to the wall where the new main electrical panel was mounted. It was a large, gray metal box, the nerve center for the entire building. He and a few youth volunteers had spent the last 2 weekends running every new circuit back to this single point. It was clean, perfectly organized, and safe. It was a piece of work he was proud of. He took a black Sharpie from his shirt pocket. He looked at the smooth, gray door of the breaker panel, the unseen heart of the building that would give it light and power for decades to come. Then, in his clear, steady handwriting, he signed his name. Darius Miller, electrician. He didn't need a plaque. He didn't need a gala. This was his legacy. It wasn't a grand gesture meant to be seen by the wealthy and powerful. It was a quiet act of service, built with his own 2 hands, for a community that needed it. It was a symbol of his own rewiring, a declaration that his worth was not determined by the company he kept or the balance in his bank account, but by the strength of his character and the skill he brought to the world. True wealth is not about the money you have, but the value you create, It's not found in the spotlight of a grand ballroom, but in the quiet, steady work of making things better. It's about knowing your own power, even when others try to keep you in the dark, and then using that power to turn the lights on for everyone. Have you ever felt underestimated, only to find your true strength in the process? Share your story in the comments below. Your journey of reclaiming your worth could inspire someone else to do the same. And for more stories of love, justice, and the quiet triumph of character, please subscribe to Love Beyond Pride.